Hello, everybody. Watching that film makes me feel a little bit like I want to cry, so sorry for that. The first thing that I want to talk to you about, I guess, is to try and explain what I think Extinction Rebellion is asking of us, of all of us. And as you can see, it's really a thing about facing up to life. And we know that life is at threat. I recently met some Indigenous elders who wanted to help us to hold council with young people, and they said that we have seen that some of the younger brothers have realised that they are part of an endangered species now. And if you face up to life, then you really also necessarily have to look in the face of death. And I think we live in a very death-phobic culture, which is, ironic given the sort of endemic violence that human beings put into the world. I think the other thing that Extinction Rebellion wants you to do is to question what you should do when you're faced with the immorality of a society and a culture which is planning the destruction of the next generation and the destruction of the conditions for life itself, knowing that that will impact children who are born today. And it's also about recognising that along with being in a climate emergency, that we're living through an extinction event. So people have termed this the sixth mass extinction. And there are geological records that show that this has happened on Earth 5 times previously. But the question's been raised, are we really using the right language again? Because actually there's no sign that the previous extinction events were caused by sentient beings who knew exactly what they were doing. And with this, people have offered us the new term, should it be called the first mass extermination. So what we tried to do when we launched this thing was to get people to use more appropriate language, and this was one of our early actions. I made that in my kitchen with some help from some friends. And there was some controversy about some of our earlier actions. You might know that we occupied Greenpeace, for example. People said, you can't do that, that's very bad. And also they said, you can't say we're fucked to people. But the reality was that we were looking at people in the environmental sector and in movements and in campaigns, and they all say this around their boardrooms and in their offices and down the pub, but they would not dare to say it to the public. And so what we recognised was necessary was to shift this Overton window, the lens of what's kind of acceptable public and political discourse, and to say we're not using appropriate words and we're also not using appropriate action. And so encouraging people to sacrifice their liberty in defence of their beliefs has gone quite a long way, I think, in reinforcing the urgency of the situation. So with all of this, we've entered into a period of sort of grieving, and we really do embrace grief. I know grief very well personally, and I think it's a constructive human state to be in, which is really useful when you recognise yourself as a change movement, to embrace something which is a very natural part of life. And we've done a lot of grieving together, and that work continues. This was a funeral that we organised, where we tried to actually bury a coffin on Parliament Square. And when the police arrested all the people with the shovels digging the hole, we took the coffin down to Buckingham Palace and we read out our declaration of rebellion there, declaring that the social contract is broken. We don't see ourselves as obedient citizens now. We're in an open state of rebellion against the British government because it is failing its citizens on its primary purpose, which is to protect them and to serve them. And these events have been the result of a kind of radical cooperation and collaboration. And I think one of the things which is very exciting about working with Extinction Rebellion is that there are lots of unusual people working together. So you might have seen, if you've looked at our protests, that we have ex-police officers sitting in the road with teachers, with doctors, with lawyers, with scientists, with sociologists, with philosophers, with artists, with musicians, and also with a very good dose of fashion professionals and creatives joining our movement. These guys have done an amazing job, and as a person with a background in fashion, I salute the people who've been organising our fashion actions, because I haven't actually had very much time to help them. They've organised a huge amount of stuff, which I get to just show up to, which is super nice if you just get to go to somebody else who's organised a protest for you. And the protesting against fashion and against the destruction of the fashion industry, I think, isn't highlighting anything which is news to any of us, right? Like, everybody knows that the fashion industry is really, really bad. It's toxic, it pollutes, it's oppressive, it's been built on the back of slavery, and many, many people die, and many, many ecosystems are destroyed in the production of our fashion industry. But I think for us now to ask a question of ourselves in the fashion context, I think for me the question is, you know, what is glamorous about living in a dying world? And what is fashion doing to the planet? And is it really worth it? The fashion industry obviously is built on elitism and exclusion. And for me, the rebellion that we're trying to build is one of inclusion, and which is firmly, firmly rooted in empathy. And we've been asking people to sort of move into a heart-led space. You know, what does it mean to really live a good life now? So we know that long-term everybody's saying these very scary things about how hot the planet might get. At the moment, we're on a trajectory which leads us to around 3 to 4 degrees of global warming by the end of the century. And that's been described by scientists as incompatible with organised human life. But in the short term, the danger is also already in the room. So we know these fires that are blazing in California, in Eastern Australia. We know that the Amazon is on fire. We expect that at 3 to 4 degrees of global warming, the Amazon will burn down and die back anyway. That's often called the lungs of the earth. We very much need to hold on to our forests. We live with an air pollution crisis, which is a global genocide. The World Health Organization say that there are around 7 million premature deaths every year due to people breathing in poisonous air, and almost 10,000 of those are in London. And some of us have also campaigned on this. This is a picture taken in Delhi recently. And just to bring it home even closer, the flooding that is occurring in the UK is here. And we know that people who suffered great flooding around 8 years ago have still not been paid out by their insurance. And now it's happening again. People will lose their lives, their livelihoods, and their property, and everything that goes with that. So we know that whilst the people often in the poorest countries who deserve to suffer the impacts of our devastating lifestyles the least are going to feel it the hardest and the worst. But also it's here and it's at home now, and I hope people can use that to wake themselves and their friends and families up. In the UK, we are expecting to be around 30 to 40 years away from a total loss of soil infertility, because we are destroying topsoil at a very vast rate. Food security experts have been warning us about an increased risk of multi-breadbasket failure. That means when you have a large grain-growing region of the world and the crops fail, or we get a very much reduced yield. And many experts believe that we're going to see a very severe agricultural global crisis within the next decade, and that won't be one which rich people in the Northern Hemisphere are exempt from. The recent hurricane that hit the Bahamas is worth mentioning in the terms of extreme weather, because the people who lived there, who were evacuated, who've had their lives and all of their infrastructure destroyed, are not questioning how or where to rebuild things, but whether to rebuild them at all. So we are looking also at some areas of the world which, if they were reported on properly, you would understand are likely to become some of the first areas where people just decide they can't live there anymore. And we're going to see a very enormous amount of displacement of people in the coming years and decades. So a lot of people want to know about how our rebellion gets organised, and people have remarked in the press about how it appears to be complete chaos, and actually when you go out on the streets, everything just kind of clicks into place. This sign was a gift, really, to us when we closed Waterloo Bridge. This was outside Somerset House. What we have set up is a decentralised movement. And the systems that we have mean that people are empowered to act within a set of principles and values. It means that that can start to happen very rapidly. You don't need a membership, you don't need to sign anything, you don't need to pay anything, but you can self-organise, and we have a self-organising system. It's aiming to empower people to get stuff done. It helps with the kind of rapid organising, with the sort of big organising models that you've seen us be inspired by in recent years. And it's based partly on these principles of holacratic organising. So I'd have a look at that in terms of the sort of radical nature of looking at the way organisations exist. We've been promoting the virtue of disobedience, of course, and civil disobedience has a history of achieving rapid social change, mass participation in civil disobedience. It's very important that you don't lose the term mass participation that comes along with that. We really do need big numbers to do what we need to do. It's also been an iterative process, so it was born out of a group of activists called Rising Up, who were based here in the UK, people who were testing out tactics of doing civil disobedience. We went and broke the law, we sat in roads, we painted buildings, we broke our bail terms, some of us went on hunger strike, and it was all about getting information about what works. And of course, this stuff kind of pisses people off. It was interesting to me that when we went on hunger strike last year to campaign against the expansion of Heathrow Airport, that one of the most useful facets of that action was how angry people got with me personally. And when your friends and family call you up and email you and text you in an outrage saying, what the fuck do you think you're doing to yourself? I'm extremely worried. Then you get to say, don't worry about me, worry about this. And for me, the way that that landed with people who I thought were listening to me, but actually really weren't taking it to heart, was extremely effective. And so self-sacrifice is a big part of what we do. Non-violence is also absolutely crucial to what we do. And when we set this up, we had a talk that toured the country. It was called Heading for Extinction and What to Do About It. And basically, it walks you through how bad things are, and you look at the science, and you look at it, and you talk about it in a rational way, and then you talk about the evidence that there is for civil disobedience being a good way to achieve rapid social change. And at the end, you ask people if they want to sign up. And this toured the country before we even made our sort of declaration in October last year. And there were 3 boxes that you could tick on the form if you filled one in. And the first one said, do you want to help? And the second one said, do you want to get arrested? And the third one said, would you be willing to go to prison? And that was the way that we got this whole thing moving. So, as an arts coordinator with Extinction Rebellion, I work with the design team, and we've built a look and feel, and we've built an identity, and we've tried to make it into a program that people can use. It's quite simple. Hopefully it allows a lot of space for people to bring their own messages and their own aesthetics and things to the movement. But we've recently, our design team have been running a talk around art schools called Design Isn't Important. And I just wanted to say to this room, in case there are some designers here, that I think that that's categorically true, and people need to wake up to that fact. Because design in and of itself really doesn't matter at all. But what design does in the world does matter, and what it can do to people, and what it can do to the environment, what it can do to people's minds and behaviours is what matters. And so we've created a movement which has no merchandise. When you decide that you're going to start something about raising awareness or trying to change the course of the environmental movement, people say, hey, make a T-shirt, sell a T-shirt, you could do an organic one, that'll be nice, that'll be good. And we all said no. We are not making merchandise. We're not trying to save the planet by selling a T-shirt, okay? That's not how this goes. We're doing things differently. So We make print blocks. We encourage people to make their own merchandise. People go out in rebellious spaces. People print their own garments in the street, in the spaces that we occupy. And we have this great challenge that the symbol that I hope you're all starting to recognise is the extinction symbol, doesn't belong to us. So probably our greatest visual asset isn't ours, and it's protected for non-commercial use only. And that also gives us a great problem to have, where we are able to question the idea of how we use that, how it is sort of travelling around the world, and thinking about value and trust, exchange, and all of the things that go along with making material goods and wearing messages. So when you move into a virtue ethics space and you decide to think about what it means to live a good life, I guess you also have to admit that we are all part of the problem, right? And that's also something that I think we've been fairly successful in doing, is getting people to realise that it's okay to admit that we are all responsible for this situation, that we all have a job to do to try and work out what to do next. And in our industry, I just want to mention the thing that happens very often, which is the first stumbling block which stops us from having useful conversations about this. And it's exemplified by the recent press about the CEO of H&M. Now, that was reported as that person saying that the environmental movement was going to be bad for jobs or bad for our industry. And I have to say that I think it is crucial that we all agree that we should refuse to be pitted against Labour as the green movement. It's not a useful conversation. It stops you from being able to move forward. And I think it's the first thing that we have to realise is like not a grown-up place to be, where people say, yeah, well, you can't do that because jobs, okay? Because that's just not getting us anywhere. And we've been stuck there with that for quite some time. And people increasingly want me to go and have arguments with people who are labour organisers and stuff. And it's just not interesting, okay? It's not useful. So the question really for me is that we know there's no business to be done on a dead planet, as somebody once said, and we know that we have to organise our way through an uncertain future and a huge amount of upheaval, and I know that it begins often for people who are taking a stance personally on something. And we usually, if we think to ourselves, we know that there's one thing that we're not doing that we could easily be doing that we've thought about for a long time. And that could be at work or it could be in your personal life. So I just want to give you like 1 or 2 minutes. If you turn to the person next to you and just say something to them about a thing that you know you could actually do or you could start to do quite quickly that would be part of your rapid response to these urgent times that we're living in.